Okay, so today I wanted to talk about spoiler etiquette. Yeah, etiquette. Not necessarily a hard and fast rule, certainly not a law, but what should you do when it comes to the discussion of spoilers? So, for those of you who don't know, a spoiler is pretty self-explanatory. Anything that would be deemed to be a spoiler and anyone discussing it is a spoiler. Yeah. So we're on BookTube here, so you have a book that you've read, but your friend has not read it, and your friend wants to read it, and instead of waiting for your friend to read it, you can't wait to tell them everything that happened in the book. Well, anything that you're telling them that is a big deal in that book, it's a spoiler. So if you have a really good friend, that good friend will say to you, that's fine, I don't mind that you spoiled for me. If you have a really honest friend, they'd probably say, why did you spoil it for me? I haven't read the book yet. We've all experienced the frustrations of being spoiled for certain things. I remember, oh my goodness me, I remember when the release of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows was coming out, I was so excited to read the conclusion of this epic series, but because it was so well loved around the world, anyone who could get their hands on anything prior to the release or just after the release was going to do so, and they were going to say spoilers, and somehow I ended up being spoiled for some massive things, and it just became a very big letdown for me that, yeah, I ended up waiting on picking up the final book because I was just so annoyed with the fact that I had actually been spoiled for some very integral things. But it is one thing to spoil for a friend, quite another to spoil for the masses. If you have a BookTube channel and you want to talk about a book, giving away spoilers, well, I guess viewers can be divided. There are some viewers who really don't mind if you give them spoilers, but the majority of us would think, why are you spoiling this book when I really want to read it? In fact, I'm probably the worst. If you spoil something for me, I'm probably going to have the worst reaction out of everyone I know, because I like going into my books completely blind. I don't even want to know the premise of the book, which to some is not considered spoilery. So I don't want to know anything aside from the title, the author, the age rating, and the genre, and that's purely because I need that information for my TBR videos. But aside from that, I don't want to know anything at all going into the book. I don't even want to know the name of the protagonist. To me, that is a spoiler. I haven't picked up the book yet, so don't tell me even a minor plot point. If I come across a monthly wrap or a BookTube video where a booktuber is talking about multiple books and I see them get to a point where they're going to discuss a book that I'm about to read, I completely skip over that entire section of them talking about that book for fear of being spoiled. But even if you're not like me, even if you can handle a premise being told to you and you don't deem that to be a spoiler, then it's heartbreaking when you are told more than just the premise. So today I want to cover a couple of different things. I want to talk about what is the courtesy when it comes to spoilers and what you should do. I also want to talk about if there are exceptions to that courtesy. And I also want to talk about why you should adhere to the common courtesy. So let's begin. So there are different things that should be extended when it comes to the courtesy that you give anyone who potentially will experience the spoiler that you have to share. But I think that the biggest umbrella for all of these little different courtesies that you can extend comes back to a warning that you put in place, letting whoever it is know that you are about to spoil what has happened. Now, going specifically off of booktubers who may be doing reviews of a certain book, or who may just be talking about different books, but they're going to be spoiling each and every one of them, I think that the best thing you can do is find a way to warn your viewers that you are going to be spoiling. Now, there are a couple of different ways to go about doing this. I personally adhere to the one of doing all of these things because I don't want to spoil anyone that I may be spoiling for. Before I give you a couple of different pointers when it comes to ways that you can go about warning your viewers that you're about to spoil them, or hey, you may be doing a podcast, so it would go for listeners as well. But before I go into that, I just want to make a point that there are certain types of reviewers out there who prescribe to the belief that if a book has been out for a really long time and it's very well known, people should have already read it and just assume that you're going to spoil for them. I don't prescribe to that, and I don't think you should either. So the Harry Potter series, I mentioned it recently, and I think is a great example here. There are a number of booktubers out there who will just talk about Harry Potter in a spoilery way without saying that without, giving any type of a warning that they're going to go into a spoiler. And I don't think you should. Don't assume that everyone who is going to be consuming your content, whether they are listening or viewing or whatever it is, or reading or whatever it is, don't assume that they are just going to have read or consumed whatever it is that you're spoiling because it is popular and because it was released a long time ago. I think that there is no exception to advising everyone that you are going to spoil, regardless of the book's popularity or how long it has been out. So the first, most obvious and best way that I can see to advise people that you are going to spoil is to include this in the title of whatever it is that you are discussing. If you are doing a written book review, if you are doing a book review on a podcast, or if you're doing a book review on a booktube channel, include the word spoiler somewhere in the title. For example, if you are going to spoil Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, maybe entitle the review Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets spoiler review, so that people are aware. Especially if we go back to booktube content, if you are to do a Chamber of Secrets spoiler review and you type in your title Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets open brackets spoiler review close brackets, then your viewer knows right away you are going to spoil before they even click, which gives them the choice of whether or not they are going to click on that particular video. And yes, while you may not get as many views as if you were to leave the spoiler tag out of the title, it is a lot more honest, and if the viewer does decide to click on the video, then they have gone in fully warned. They know they are going to be spoiled. If you don't include that there, well, it really comes down to how you proceed with the video. I'm going to just keep talking about booktube stuff, but please just know moving forward, if I have more time, I'd include all ideas, but this includes, as I've been mentioning, podcasts as well as written reviews, but I'll stick to just the one example of booktube moving forward, just for the sake of timing. So, okay, I have come across many book reviews on booktube. I'm going into my 5th year next year of being on booktube, and boy, have things changed a lot over the course of time when it comes to booktube. But certainly back in the day when I first began, there were reviews here, there, and absolutely everywhere, dedicated reviews for certain books. What surprised me would be that I would click on a review for a book that has not told me if it is a spoiler review, a spoiler-free review, or spoiler-free and spoiler. It just has the name of the book and the word review. You click on it, and they are spoiling before they've even gotten through the first minute, and you're spoiled. You're spoiled right away without having any heads up. Which brings up my second point. If you're not going to put it in the title, which I think you should anyway, I just think it is manners and respect for your viewers to actually just put it in the title. But if you're not going to put it in the title, at the very least, open up the video by saying, "Hi everyone, I'm so-and-so," do your whole intro, and then say, "Today I am reviewing Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling, and I just want to let you know this is going to be a spoiler review. So if you have not read the book before, I advise that you go ahead and read the book first and then come back and watch this video." Not only are you giving everyone the heads up that you didn't give in the title that you are going to spoil, but you are giving them the time to click off the video before you start spoiling. I was about to give an example there of spoiling things in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, but of course that will go completely against what I'm doing here. But yeah, so I think we should be giving a heads up. I think the title is the best way, but if you're not going to do it in the title, certainly say it in your introduction so that you allow your viewer the choice of whether they want to listen to the spoilery review or not. Because believe it or not, there are actually readers out there who may want to listen to or watch a spoiler-filled review without reading the book, because there are so many books out there that we won't get the opportunity to read every single book that's ever been published. That's just a fact. It's an unfortunate fact that every reader has had to understand at some point in their life and then deal with and process, and it's not easy to know that there is no way any reader is going to be able to get through every single published book by the time their time on Earth is done. But because of this, sometimes a viewer on BookTube would be more than happy to get a spoiler-filled review without reading the book, because you're not going to get to that book anyway. So it would help you to just hear the spoilery thoughts, and then you know about that book, and you can just tick it off your list as though you had read it anyway. So just because you're spoiling something doesn't necessarily mean that someone who hasn't read the book isn't going to view the content anyway. They may still want to do that, but it gives those the opportunity who have not read it and don't want to be spoiled the opportunity to not be spoiled. And also, just because you're writing a spoilery, you're doing a spoiler review of a book that someone hasn't read, it doesn't mean that they're not going to come back and watch that review once they're done reading the book. In fact, I find it's much more common when booktubers do spoilery reviews of books, and you have, the subscribers of these booktubers trust these booktubers and their thoughts. They will actually go away, read the book, and then want to watch the spoiler review to see what their favorite booktuber has to say about the book they've just read. So it doesn't mean that the video isn't necessarily going to be viewed. It will just be viewed once they've read the book. And as I say, they're probably going to be a lot more inclined to watch the spoilery review because they have their own thoughts and now want to know what their favorite booktuber has to say about that book. So all in all, just wrapping up this section, because I don't want this to be too long a video and this section has already taken too long, I believe that the most common courtesy, just out of sheer decency, that a booktuber can do is give the viewer the heads up that they are going to spoil. Now, I just want to jump into a little unknown territory here, because I think it's really tough to navigate what is deemed to be a spoiler, because, readers are not monoliths, reviewers are not monoliths. There is no one be-all, end-all when it comes to what is deemed to be a spoiler. As for myself, as I say, I like going into books blind. If it's not the title, the author, the age rating, and the genre, I don't want to know. I don't want to know what the first word of the book is. I don't want to know who the main character is, what their name is. I don't want to know what they're wearing in the first scene. All of this to me is a spoiler. I think in general, however, anything to do with anything that will affect the main plot of the story or the main arc of character growth of the story will be deemed to be a spoiler in general, but everyone is different. So what is deemed to be a spoiler, is different for each reader and each reviewer. With that in mind, one common courtesy that is optional that you could extend in your introduction is to state what a spoiler is to you before you do the review, to assist those who may or may not deem that to be a spoiler as well. So you may opt to do, and I'll go the opposite path here. You may opt to do a spoiler-free review on your channel. I think the best thing you can do is explain what you deem a spoiler to be, because if you deem anything in the first half of a book to be spoiler-free content that you can discuss, and the viewer doesn't deem everything in the first half of the book, especially if that book is 750 pages long, and so you're practically saying that anything in the first, 304, whatever it is, 350, 400, my maths is not with me today, but somewhere pages of that book is absolutely, fine, and you can discuss that. I just think it's optional, but it's, good manners to say, today I'm doing a spoiler-free review of, we'll keep the same example all the way through, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Before I get in, I just want to let you know that anything that comes up in the premise, I don't deem to be a spoiler, and anything that comes up in the first quarter of the book, I don't deem to be a spoiler, so I will be discussing that, but otherwise, I'm going to keep things more generalized, which leads me into my next point. What is the best way to do a spoiler-free review? The best way to do a spoiler-free review is to keep things absolutely generalized. While you can give an overview of the premise, personally not for me as a reader, I'd prefer you not to, but again, I'll go back and watch the review when I've read the book. I stand alone in my views on what's a spoiler, but if you go off the generalization of what readers view to be a spoiler and not to be a spoiler, a premise is something that you can talk about in a spoiler-free video. That is absolutely fine. But then after talking about that premise, you can completely zoom out and focus on your thoughts and feelings rather than talking about the actual incidents that occurs in the book. So to give you an example, let's just say that Peter and Paul are fighting over Mary, the love interest, and by the end of the book, Mary makes a decision. Instead of saying, which would very much be a spoiler, Peter and Paul are both vying for the attention of Mary, and then because Peter beats Paul in a game of chance, he wins the battle and gets to take Mary out, but Mary doesn't like Peter, so she ends up with Paul. We are spoiling here so much. So instead what you could say is, the premise of this book is that we follow these two boys, Peter and Paul, who are vying for the attention of Mary. Who will Mary end up with? Only time will tell. Well, my thoughts on the book are, and that's when you would zoom out and say, look, I thought that the dynamic between Peter and Paul was really fascinating because they are completely different characters. You're not spoiling anything by saying that, because that could mean absolutely anything. Where if you delve deeper than that and say, because they are absolutely different characters, Peter is very forthright in the way that he thinks. So when he plays the game of chance and he turns over that card and he reads the clue, of course he's going to understand, he's going to be able to answer the question and win the game. I mean, you're spoiling it already. So pulling back in a spoiler-free way to say, I love the dynamic between Peter and Paul because they are such different characters and they bounce really well off of each other. Meanwhile, I found Mary to be very reserved, and I wish that she wasn't. Again, this is not a spoiler. You're just saying a character trait about this specific person. So when it comes to, spoiler-free content, it's tough to say what would be deemed a spoiler and what wouldn't be deemed a spoiler, but it's always a safe bet to step back a little and focus more on your thoughts and feelings as opposed to what's actually going on in the book itself. I want to now talk about an exception to the rule, but again, there is always going to be the warning heads up. So in this case, I'm going to talk about, let's say someone is doing a monthly wrap or a reading vlog. The reading vlog is actually a much better example because reading vlogs are very casual. So you're doing your reading vlog and you're trying to keep it spoiler free, but oh my gosh, you need to talk about that final moment with Peter and Paul in that chance game because really, it looks like Paul's going to win, but then Peter wins because of this reason and that reason and that reason, which of course is all going to be a spoiler, but you have to talk about it because it was so good. And otherwise, why the heck do you have a booktube channel if you can't even talk about this stuff? You need to get it out, and you need to get it out now. Okay, that is absolutely fine. Yes, you need to get it out. I understand. Yes, that is why you have a booktube channel. That is absolutely fine. But you must include the warning. So, you're going along in your reading vlog and you're saying, oh, I'm really enjoying this book and I'm close to the end and it's been really exciting. Oh my gosh, I have to talk to you all about this thing because it needs to be spoken about. And then you jump in with a warning. I'm going to put a timestamp on the screen. If you don't want to hear this warning, jump ahead to this timestamp, and then you'll be able to skip over the warning and not hear that. You'll be able to skip over the spoiler and not hear the spoiler. Or, you know, I'm going to have a countdown clock on the screen. Or I'm going to have the word spoiler up on the screen. Or if you don't edit your videos, there's a very simple way to do this. What I used to do back in the day when I didn't edit my videos is I said, I'm going to raise my hand and say a spoiler. Scroll through the little, scrolling bar down the bottom. When you see that my hand goes down, then I'm not talking about the spoiler anymore. But if you do edit, it is as simple as putting the word spoiler up on the screen. And once the word spoiler is gone, you know the spoiler is over. A timestamp is a very effective way. So this is, of course, in post-production, you would realize that between the 2-minute mark and the 3-minute mark, you are talking about the spoiler. So you might say, timestamp is 3:05. And then if you don't want to hear the spoiler, you as the viewer can go to 3:05 and completely skip over the spoiler. So are there exceptions to the rule? Yes, there are. You absolutely can talk about a spoiler when you haven't warned people in the introduction that you're going to talk about a spoiler. But if you're going to do that, you need to find a way to ensure that those who don't want to be spoiled aren't going to be spoiled. And that's the best way you can do it, is to say, okay, I'm going to go into a spoiler now. What you can do is follow whatever instruction that ensures you will not hear this, and you can just skip to however, you can skip to the certain point where we're back to the spoiler-free stuff. You know what I'm saying? It's always best to warn people rather than just jump in and say certain things. Now, as I say, for me, Harry Potter feels like the most with this offense, I don't know how to better word that, where I'll click on Harry Potter reviews and booktubers will just jump right in and go, oh yes, in Philosopher's Stone when this happened, and they're talking about the most integral thing that occurs in the entire book. And I'm thinking, okay, I get it. It's a very popular series. Millions of people around the world have read it, but just because it's popular and just because millions of people around the world have read it doesn't mean that every single person who's clicked onto your video has read this book yet, and you've just spoiled the big moment at the end of that book. If you've read Harry Potter and if you're American, Sorcerer's Stone, if you're Australian or from the UK, then Philosopher's Stone book. You know that last big moment, the final big battle of the first book. The big thing that goes down. You know what I'm referring to. And that is a spoiler-free way to say it. You know that big final climax, the big thing that happens at the end of the book? That thing. That is how you can say it in a spoiler-free way. But yeah, people will actually talk about that without giving a heads up. And all I can think is, yeah, there may have been millions of people around the world who've already read this book, but that doesn't mean everyone has, and there's every chance someone's going to click on your video, hear that without a warning, and go, oh, okay, well now you've ruined the book for me because you've told me everything that happens. So I don't think there's ever a safe moment to just assume, and we all know the age-old saying that I won't complete, but it starts with, if you assume, you make a You know what I'm saying here. Yeah, I don't think it's ever safe to assume with any book, even if you look at really popular books like Harry Potter, Hunger Games, potentially Mistborn, Lord of the Rings. If you're in a cozy group, then some of the more popular cozy mysteries. It really doesn't matter how popular they are. You need to go off the assumption. You need to think about the lowest common denominator, and I always do when it comes to spoilers. You need to think about the possibility that someone's going to click on your video who has not read the book, And do you really want to spoil it for them? How would you have felt if it was spoiled for you? And you got to think of those two things. One, lowest common denominator, someone who hasn't read it could click. And two, how would you feel if you were in their situation? You haven't read this book, make it worse. You're about to read this book. It's the very next book you're going to pick up. So that's why you clicked on the video, because you're hoping that this person was going to hype up the book for you. But instead of hyping it up for you, they hop, skipped, jumped, leaped, bounded over the line that you shouldn't cross and have told you all of the spoilers of that book, and now there's no point in reading the book anymore. I mean, so yeah, just be mindful of whenever you are going to do spoilers, whether your video is going to be completely spoiler filled or whether you're just going to put in a spoiler randomly like in a reading vlog. Always give the heads up. That is your best common courtesy. Now, I very quickly want to talk about an amazing compromise that I was introduced to in my very first year on BookTube in 2020, which is the spoiler-free and spoiler book review. I think these are fantastic because it's a great compromise for everyone. It is, as the title suggests, you are going to have a spoiler-free section of the review and a spoiler-filled section. And the best thing about this is the first part of your video, however long that's going to be, is completely spoiler free. Then when you get to the end of that section, you again give that heads up. Okay, we're now at the end of the spoiler free section. I'm going to go into the spoilery section now. So if you haven't read the book, then I recommend going away and reading it before coming back to the spoilery section. But for those of you who are here for the spoilery section, let's jump into that right now. It's taking me back to how I used to do things. I remember I was very conscious of, after being spoiled on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows before I read it, which was the biggest disappointment of a spoiler I've ever had. Not only was I given one spoiler, I was given about 5 main, huge, integral spoilers to that book before I read it, and it completely let me down, to the point where when I did my spoiler-free and spoiler videos, I would get to the spoiler section and say, okay, so I finished the spoiler-free section, I'm now going to go into the spoilery section. And I would go on for a bit, saying things like, if you haven't read the book, then please, go ahead and read the book and then come back and join us for that. If you're not joining us for the spoiler section, thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. If you are joining me for the spoiler section, let's go into that one right now. 1 minute later, here we are in the spoilery section, and I say the words, spoiler, 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 we are in the spoilery section, spoiler, 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 you have been warned. Okay. So I would give my viewers a minute and a half in case they were cleaning the house or something down the other end of the room and needing time to run to whatever device and pause so that, they wouldn't be spoiled. But you do it your way. I just think the best common courtesy when it comes to a spoiler is be very clear that you are going to spoil something before you do, because there is nothing worse than clicking onto a BookTube video and having someone spoil something for you when you haven't even been warned they're going to. And this is a book that you plan on reading, and all you can think is, well, what's the point now? Because you've already spoiled it for me. And, it's just horrible. There are people out there, granted, who can hear spoilers and still want to go ahead and read the book. Don't get me wrong. But you ruin the first-hand experience of reading a book without additional information when you spoil for someone. And the best advice that I heard when it came to spoilers, and that's why I mentioned in this video, and it bears repeating, is put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel if you are a content creator on BookTube? How would you feel if someone is spoiling something for you that you're about to read? You wouldn't like it. And so you've just come through reading this book that you love. You weren't spoiled for it, and so you got to have an amazing experience. If you spoil this book for someone else without warning them, they won't be able to have the great experience you've had, the great unspoiled experience you've had, because you've spoiled it for them. So it's just something to keep in mind. I want to just make a very quick point before I do wrap things up here. I am in no way, shape, or form here saying you should never spoil spoil anything. Not at all. I'm just saying you should warn people before you do. BookTube is all about discussing books. There are books that we read that we love. There are books that we read that we think, meh, they could go either way. And then there are books that we read that we absolutely can't stand and they were ridiculous. And either way, if you love it or you hate it, you want to talk about it. I'm not saying you have to censor yourself and you can't spoil. You can. Just make sure that you give people that heads up and have that common courtesy and decency to do so. If you have any further comments or thoughts on this subject matter, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm sure there's a lot more I haven't already covered. But in the meantime, make sure that you let people know, give them the heads up, and enjoy your reading, enjoy your reviewing, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy reading! Bye everyone!